Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, also known as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. And I think we're going to be back into being a Rockets podcast, Brian, with all the subjects we have today. We're going to be talking about the new school Rockets and if small ball works. We're going to be talking about hate-watching games from Daryl Morey, and then some other stuff, some drama, some wrestling mark drama. So let's get into that. Before we get going, let's do two things that I've been kind of lax in doing, Brian, but are part of the show. Actually, the first thing I forgot to do, which I always do, is, Brian, how's it going? How's your day been?
A little bit of a stressful day. Again, we're here in the United States. It's March 3rd, 2020. It is Super Tuesday for the election. We're headed down towards it. So lots of drama, but we are still going to try to talk about some basketball because, yeah, like you said, a lot of interesting NBA topics right now.
I will just throw this out there in a way that describes so much about the United States, and in fact, so much about many things politically worldwide, but just kind of more interesting with the United States since we're young, which is, God, our political system, like just the processes for getting things done is so ridiculously stupid and so obviously not built for the world we're in. And it reminds me a lot of like banking, you know, when you like have to go do something at the bank and they go, oh, fax this form to this person here. And you're like, well, can I email? And they're like, no, you've got to come pick this form up at the bank. And then you've got to fax it to this person during these hours. And then we'll send you a stamped reply. And you're like, oh my God, why?
What about this analogy? Isn't it like a big, like bad pile of legacy code? You know, it's not in the code repository or anything. It's just kind of been getting piled on over decades.
That is you're going for the computer scientist to me, Brian, and you've got me. Yeah, so many people are used to this, which is you have a legacy system that runs so much of your stuff, and this is true in a lot of big companies for what it's worth that run a lot of the stuff that's important to you. That was the Y2K bug, for example, is basically a bunch of banks were running code that people wrote in the 70s and said,
this is COBOL, this is Fortran, these are languages that are like, you know, assembly practically, just a little higher than that.
We can say the following about that, which is a lot of times with older languages that are particularly made to run on with less memory, they're, you know, made to run more efficiently. They still work, you know, they work, etc. It's just, yeah, when you suddenly update something like, hey, they're not ready to handle this date. So the legacy code argument is fantastic because, yeah, the United States voting process was built for like slave owners with land to vote in an agrarian system when you basically had like 13 equally sized states. And even that like disappeared quickly, right? When the United States was first formed with the 13 states, the population started shifting really, really quick, right? Like New York started growing faster than some of the other states. So the United States like outgrew the system they built, the Electoral College, which, you know, was founded in like the first Constitution. That was already like outdated in the 1800s. And, you know, now we're in the 2000s and we're still using it. We're using it with, you know, states like North Dakota and Texas, who are, you know, just so disproportionately sized and all this. So I don't know, Brian, it's one of those things where it's going on, it's happening. And sometimes, like I've kind of mentioned before on the show, the way I cope with things is I'm just like, kind of take a step back and I just laugh at the absurdity of this legacy code system that I'm like, I don't even know how this is still
hearing
running.
A lot of the old axiom from people these days, if you're not laughing, you're crying is what people are saying right now. So yeah, I'd rather be laughing too.
Let's get on to basketball. First off, let's hand out a no prize. So on last week's, or I think 2 weeks ago podcast, we discussed basically how everybody in the NBA should be approaching the 76ers about fleecing Ben Simmons because we didn't think that Ben Simmons had signed his max contract yet. Now, it is true that he's not on his max contract yet, but he did sign a max contract which goes into effect next season, which, oh my goodness, puts the Philadelphia 76ers in trouble. So thanks very much to Shawbucks, who commented on it, who said Ben Simmons signed a max contract this offseason because essentially between Al Horford, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, and Josh Richardson, they've committed like $130 million to their starting five. And the frustrating part is of that five, we really only think Ben Simmons is worth it. So the 76ers are in rough shape. And a funny thing, Brian, Ben Simmons, I looked up his max contract. It's got a 15% trade kicker. So the funny thing is, that's probably going to disincentivize teams to ask about him, but we still easily still worth the money. So this offseason, we think it's worth teams going to the 76ers if they underperform in the playoffs and going for Ben Simmons. If we're the 76ers, we'd say if Joel Embiid still has value, try to flip Joel Embiid because we just don't know if he's going to be worth it. So it is a rough situation for the 76ers, who have committed now all of their money to what we'd argue is like one star, one player with high upside that can't stay healthy, one decent starter, one aging player that's already starting to decline, and one other player.
Yeah, I think our analysis from 2 weeks ago still mostly holds on this. They should try to keep Simmons and move those other players, to get better guards. But, we'll see if they're able to, like you just said.
Rebound and threes asked about some teams. I'm going to say we're going to push this off, rebound and threes. So remind us in the offseason, because that is a hardy topic, and I am not prepared. But rebound and threes did also comment on a piece I put out today that I want to talk more about, Brian, so this was a fun one. So refresher course of Sloan Analytics is going on. The Boxscore Geeks, after I think 3 years ago, I got a picture with Sam Hinkie wearing a shirt that said I trusted the process, and all I got was the shirt. So I got to meet Sam Hinkie. I got that shirt with him. I got to go to Sloan and see that it become what I called team sports jacket. It's got like an $800 price tag, and I just got basically wipe my hands. I think you've said the same. So the Boxscore Geeks as a whole has kind of said, with how it currently is, we are probably never going to go to Sloan, barring some major shift. If we become some kind of code vendor and it makes sense to get a booth there, absolutely. But with how we're currently run and how Sloan is currently run, we're probably done with each other, even though, I think I had a 3-year run going, and I think I've been to 4 or 5 at this point. So Sloan is going on, and friend of the show, Art Rondeau, is going. And I'm just going to keep hyping Art Rondeau until a team has him. In many ways, as a funny comparable, it reminds me a lot of Moneyball. If you've seen the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt, they do a good job in there giving some credit to Bill James, because there is a scene at one point where the owner of the Red Sox is talking to Billy Beane, played by Brad Pitt, and saying, we picked up Bill James too. How did he go this long without getting hired for a team? And that's kind of our opinion on Art Rondeau. Big refresh, which is in this article. He wound up in an amazing case study with Allen Houston. We don't get these kind of studies normally, because it would be really hard to go to an NBA team and say the following: we have a person that we think can help improve your shooting. And the team goes, fantastic. We go, but here's what we'd like you to do. We would like you to have him shoot with your guy for 30 games and then not shoot with your guy for 50 games to compare the difference. And any smart front office would go, wait, you want us to be worse on purpose for 50 games for a scientific study? And we go, yeah, please. And we'd get laughed out the door. Art Rondeau ended up in a funny situation, which he can talk more about in depth. I hope he does at some point on a podcast or on his blog, where basically just like weird contract negotiations between like the player's agents, all of this stuff meant that he coached down Houston for 30 games. He didn't coach him for 50 games. And what we wound up with is still to this day one of the most remarkable data sets I've seen in a player, which is in the games that Art Rondeau coached Allen Houston, the difference in performance between those games alone, like a sample size of 30, and the rest of Allen Houston's career is so vast that it is almost inexplicable. Like, basically, our opinion is Allen Houston was never that good of an NBA player. He was below average most of his career. If we look at when he was good, it was one season. When we look at why he was good that season, it was these games where he was coached by Art Rondeau. And when we look at the energy in those games compared to the rest of his career, it is just so vast as to be just almost inexplicable. And this has been, for instance, Art Rondeau's gone to court over this. If you do a cursory Google search of him, he has had issues with the Knicks. We're going to talk that more. Shocker. I don't know if you'd believe this, Brian. There is weird backstabbing, politicking, drama with the Knicks front office. And Art Rondeau got a front row seat to that right at the very start of the Dolan era. So, all of this data that I have discussed has been like corroborated in court, where basically I had to collect it and put it together and show that. So looking at Art Rondeau and what he was capable of doing with Allen Houston, we go, this guy could be helping a team. And we're going to keep spouting his name until he does. And like I said, Moneyball reminder is, Bill James was a guy that started up a blog in the 80s, kind of got sick of it. Bill James actually, I think it wasn't a blog, it was a prospectus, right? He was writing a newsletter that you could sign up to receive for like $5. And so he was basically self-publishing a newsletter, which is essentially a precursor to the modern day blog. And he eventually got like fed up and was like, I'm so sick of the people that are talking about it. You can have all my work. It's public domain. Do whatever you want with it, but I'm done. And then, 2 decades later, finally in the Moneyball era, 2000s, got picked up by a team. It took 2-3 decades, and we're on about decade number 2 for Art with the Knicks. But that performance increase is just something we think could help teams out. And what I brought up in this article that I released today, because I said Art's going to Sloan, we think it behooves you to talk to Art. Here's a refresher on his research. But what really, really struck me, Brian, when I was looking over the data is the following. Something Art did with Allen Houston was improve his free throw shooting. And when I've talked to Art about this, what he said is initially he didn't think that was a problem. If you look at Allen Houston, he's in his career like an 86% free throw shooter. And I think when Art was working with him, he was like shooting 84% from the line. Why would you touch that? But he went into a slump in the middle of the season, so Art was like, okay, I'll give you some pointers. I'll help you out with your free throw shooting. Allen Houston shoots like 88% to end out the season, shoots 91% from the line the next season. Remarkable. One of his issues, unfortunately, Brian, was shot selection. Unlike James Harden, gets to the line 10 times a game, Allen Houston would get to the line traditionally like 2 to 3 times a game. So even that great help on his free throw performance from Art wasn't enough to keep him above average for the remainder of his career. But he helped that out, and I was like, that is really impressive. And we were talking about it. It's like, yeah, a lot of teams will say either the following. If a player is a good free throw shooter, why should I work on their free throw shot, right? They already shoot 80% from the line. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Think about the Golden State Warriors. Then if you go on the other end, like let's say like a Shaquille O'Neal, you go, he's a horrible free throw shooter. Why am I going to work really, really hard to get his free throw shooting? As long as he can get to 60%, we're fine. But the funny thing is, while you might want to work on Shaq, that would be what most people would think of first, right? That 10% can come from anywhere. We were talking a little bit about this pre-show, Brian, about money. And a fundamental flaw humans have is they'll categorize things, right? This is my entertainment money. This is my food money. The annoying economist will say they all come from the same spot, right? They're all the same money. If you were a purely rational being, which no one is, you would just view them all of the same money, and the goal would be the net impact. And we'll maybe talk this a little bit more when we talk Porzingis. The same is true with free throw shooting. It does not matter if you get one extra free throw shot because Shaquille O'Neal shooting 50% from the line improves his free throw shooting by 1%, or if that 1% comes from Kobe Bryant, who was an 84% free throw shooter. And so we really think that Art could help out teams, and are still shocked that it appears that people have not figured this out. And the way I proved this in this article is I went, modern day NBA free throw shooting is 77.1%. We also saw the league hit that league average in 1974. As a comparable, when the NBA first introduced the three-point line in 1979, 1980, league average was 28%. That is now up to about 36%. So while the league has gotten better at certain things, free throw shooting has been one of those areas that's been stagnant. And we're going, that's free money on the table for teams to improve. And we've seen a lot of the directions teams take, particularly at Sloan, right? We see the research that catches on. That's the new hotness, right? We're on iteration number 3 billion of an RPM metric at Sloan, I'm sure, this year. And we go back to basics. Can you improve free throw shooting? And we know of at least one person at Sloan that's shown success in the past, and we would love to see more work and ideal world, more case studies with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and this is one of the most important principles of Moneyball, and I remember people would talk about this a lot, God, it's been almost 20 years now when it first came out, 15 years. But, so people would say, what is the main takeaway from Moneyball? And if you said teams aren't using enough on-base percentage players versus, average players or speed players, people would say, no, that's wrong. What it really is that people need to buy statistics that are better value. It's not specifically on base percentage all the time, right? That's just one market inefficiency that, you know, Sandy Alderson and Billy Bean and them found, right? Paul DePodesta. So in that, you know, strain of things right now, it seems like everyone is chasing 3-point percentage, right? And we'll talk about the Rockets a little bit more later, and this is going to go against what I'm saying right now, but it's still a fun experiment, right? But anyway, the point is, it seems like the Rockets are spending all their capital in terms of, you know, salary, roster spots, talent, and everything on just trying to get more 3-point percentage. And they're right in the sense that, you know, the past 5 to 10 years, even more so, more than that, 3-point shooting has been the undervalued thing, and teams have not been paying enough for it. But you can go too far in the other direction, right? And the problem is, are they ignoring, well, not free throw percentage in your example, probably because they have Harden, but are they ignoring rebounding? Are they ignoring rim protection? So that's the whole point of it, is you need to spend your money in a way that you're most likely to be able to cover all these stats that win and improve yourself in all these areas. And when you focus only on one of them or the other, it just becomes marginally more difficult with money to increase them.
Well, let me come back to what you just pointed out, because I really liked it, and I want to take a slightly different angle. So I love, like, the roundabout you got us to, but I want to take exit number 3. I think you took exit.
Okay.
You said that the takeaway from Moneyball was teams weren't looking for the right statistics or spending their money optimally.
Yes.
I agree. But what I would say a bigger takeaway in sports analytics is, what's the goal, right? The goal is to win games. And the key behind winning games in, I think, all of the North American sports is point margin, right? How much I outscore the opponent by. And to that fundamental human flaw I said, where we categorize things, the reality is, in the NBA, a point or a possession is a point or a possession. It does not matter how you get it, right? It doesn't matter if I get an extra possession because of I was going to say rebound or steal, but obviously a steal is a little different because you don't give them a shot attempt. But, you know, basically, if I get the ball, I get the ball. No matter how I get the ball, if it's a rebound from Steph Curry, because, you know, for whatever reason, we called him a T-Rex pre-show. For those that don't know, Steph Curry is this player that doesn't make any sense. So many players in the NBA, there's not the death of the big man. There is not positionless basketball. Basically, in the NBA, you need really talented big players to win, and they've always ruled the NBA. And the NBA right now is ruled by Yanis and LeBron James, who, you know, are very reminiscent of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson back in the day. So, you know, it's always been that way. Steph Curry is this player that's like a smallish guard that's somehow able to rebound really well while also shooting really well and also passing really well. But that's kind of anomalous. But the key thing I would say is, a point or a possession is a point or a possession, as I was saying. And so when I was bringing up the shooting efficiency argument in kind of the Moneyball vein, what I'm saying is, so many people start focusing on, our analytics aren't good enough, or we don't, like you were saying, we don't have enough 3-point shooting, or we don't have enough rebounding. And I'm going to give a throwback. I don't know if he ever published it, but I've talked with him enough that I know this comment has come up repeatedly with Dave Barry. So Dave Barry over at Wages of Wins, you know, grandfather of the site, godfather of the site, whatever you want to call it, who came up with the wins produced metric. I've heard him multiple times just go, sign good players, right? It doesn't matter if that good player is a point guard like Chris Paul or a big like Dwight Howard. Signing good players wins basketball games. And so when I'm talking about arts research, I'm going, there are so many ways to improve point efficiency on a team. One of our keys is get good players. One of our other keys, like you were saying, is bigs tend to be undervalued. Things like rebounding tend to be undervalued. Go for that. But with art, I'm going, if you improve your shooting efficiency, I think I've looked at this before, like all else being equal, if you improve your shooting efficiency from the field like 1.5%, that's worth a win, right? So like it's either it might be as low as 0.5%, but basically compared to league average, improving your shooting efficiency helps you win more games. And we go, why don't more people focus on that? And that's the funny part, is teams will go, we got to 80% free throw shooting. That's good enough. Now we really, really need to get rebounding or 3-point shooting. And we go, there's no rule that says you can't just push that dial on free. If you get free throw shooting to 100%, that can be worth just as much as improving 3-point shooting a percentage or two or whatever, right? And so that's kind of the big takeaway I'm going is I think people get too focused on certain ways to improve the game without the holistic view of we just want to improve the team, and however we can pick up those wins, that's how we need to do it.
Yeah, right. And that's why the Rockets are such an interesting example here, right? They they do kind of seem to be ignoring that other stuff, and it's working so far. But I don't know if it'll catch up with them. Do you want to talk Rockets now? Are you ready, or is there more on your article? Because we haven't looked at the charts yet.
I was going to say, let's talk. So we got I was going to try and do the comment, then I realized we did the article first.
Okay.
The chart. I mean, the charts were interesting, and I think we've actually talked them on the show a few times. That was kind of what led to this. Is that I was thinking about these charts. I was thinking about arts research, and then what I was just more fascinated by was going. These charts show that the way the NBA has improved itself is by shot selection, which we agree, right? Ian Levy back in the day over at Hickory High released this. Kurt Goldsberry released a metric like this. This was kind of all the in vogue a couple of years in the analytics movement, which is saying better shot selection makes better teams, and we agree. And then we're just going the other thing. They're saying you can improve where you shoot the ball from, and you can improve how you shoot the ball. And we've seen a lot of great work on the where you shoot the ball from, and we think that there is still a ton of work, obviously, to be done with how you shoot the ball.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I'm ready for the comment now. So so if we talked about floor space enough yet, Porzingis, do we want to get in Porzingis? Because we had a lot of pre-show talks. I'm trying to remember what we covered.
Okay, I'll recap the point and then say kind of my stuff. And then, because there are some really good thoughts in this comment, and I didn't really find a way to connect them to the article, but I got to talk about the article, right? All right, so basically ask, what are our thoughts on floor spacing? Because there are players in the NBA right now, Brook Lopez, Kristaps Porzingis, that we think are just terrible. And if you look at the teams, if you look at the Bucks, if you look at the Mavericks, they're probably going to disagree. And they'll probably say something like, oh my goodness, Brook Lopez is amazing from three, and he's great at defense, so how dare you say he's undervalued?
Warriors won 3 titles with Klay, right?
Warriors, well, funny, that's the... Yeah, we need to get to that in a second. Don't let me forget. Don't let me forget Klay and the point we were talking a fun point pre-show that I want to get back to, but it's 2 tangents deep, so I'll get back to it. All right, so Kristaps Porzingis and Brook Lopez, though, are players that we think are horrible, but that the teams might think are good, and their defenses are going to be the following 2 things. Defense, right? Both Brook Lopez and Kristaps Porzingis are purportedly good at defense. They're probably metrics that show the following. They're on 2 teams that are very good at defense. And then also this idea called floor spacing, which is a very popular myth. This idea of if a player can shoot from outside, it forces the defense to adjust to them, and that gets their teammates better shots. And then also Rebound on Threes asks about Kristaps Porzingis and the analytics squad at, say, the Mavericks, saying, well, the Mavericks are better with Kristaps Porzingis on the court than off, so, is he a good player? Are we missing something? Would we say to replace him with an average player? And okay, so some stuff to get to there. So first off, with floor spacing, this exact point I was making about with like a pointer or possession is a pointer or possession. Even if Kristaps Porzingis is gaining you value in defense, and even with that idea of floor spacing, he is still giving up that value elsewhere. So let's say you go to the wins produced formula for both Kristaps Porzingis and Brook Lopez, and I think Kristaps Porzingis has a wins produced of 0, which means he's terrible, get him off the court. And Brook Lopez is actually, he's hit negative, where we argue he's costing you wins every game. And you say, you're forgetting to account for these things. And what I'm going to respond with, fine, add those in. I do not believe that those things can make up for the deficiencies elsewhere, because here's some really simple math. Let's say league average is 56% true shooting, which I believe it is, around there, right? Okay. Kristaps Porzingis, if he's a high usage player and he shoots at 54%, okay, this isn't hard math. That means for every shot Kristaps Porzingis takes, you have to get a shot not just league average, 2% better than league average, to just get to even. So that means you have to believe that Kristaps Porzingis floor spacing is making like 17 shots a game at 58% or better. And I don't know if I believe that. And again, even if that's true, that gets you to even. Same idea with his defense. Like, is Kristaps Porzingis a good shot blocker? Is that enough to make up for him being really bad at rebounding? Well, He's going to have to be so good at how much he impacts the opponent's shooting percentage to make up for like missing like 4 or 5 rebounds a game. And do we think he does that? And no, is gonna be my take. So it's kind of like it's really, really hard when people look at players and people hate one number aggregates for players, right? They really bristle against them, and we're on board a lot of the time. I forgot to put this on the script, Brian. And I want to talk a little bit about RPM. So recently, ESPN, their own metric called RPM, which is a garbage metric in so many ways, Brian, but I'll also say it's a black box metric. No one knows how it works. They basically updated their RPM numbers and had major shifts. And then they said, oh, by the way, we just updated these numbers. We want to give a real comprehensive explanation of what we've done. Look for that in a month or two. So basically, ESPN has a one number aggregate for players that says it tells you both how good they are and how good they will be, which makes no sense. That's based on box score and plus minus numbers, which, you know, we've looked at the things that led up to RPM are a PM adjusted plus minus, and we're like, these things are nonsense, right? So it's a bad metric, but no one knows how it works. So when people start bristling against aggregate numbers that try and explain why a player is good or bad, we understand that trepidation. But also at the same time, what we say about a player is like, when you get too in love with the things they do well and ignore all the stuff they do badly, that is not the way to do analytics. And our take on Porzingis and Brook Lopez is there is no way floor spacing and defense is good enough to make up for their deficiencies elsewhere. Now, this brings us into a fun one, Klay Thompson, and we were talking this pre-show about Andrew Wiggins too, Brian, which is Klay Thompson's problem, as you've stated many times, is not his production, it's his contract. And that's the same with Andrew Wiggins and D'Angelo Russell, right? Like the problem for Andrew Wiggins and Klay Thompson on the Warriors is not how good they are. Now, admittedly, you'd like better players, right? If you are able to upgrade Klay Thompson or Andrew Wiggins, absolutely take it. We were talking like this offseason, good God, take Andrew Wiggins, please try and turn him into Ben Simmons, and you're a contender immediately, right? Ben Simmons plus Steph Curry. Oh, I'd love to see that. Please make it happen. But at the same time, if I'm picking a starting five and I run out of players and all that's left is Klay Thompson, I'm not going to feel upset. His problem is just he's spending you a lot of money. The difference we'll give those players, Andrew Wiggins, Klay Thompson, even D'Angelo Russell, to Porzingis and Brook Lopez is I don't want Brook Lopez or Kristaps Porzingis on my team because they are so bad, they are actually worse than the replacement cost. So the question rebound and threes has with replacement with the average player. All I'll say there is you do want to replace him. You just want to make sure you replace him with the correct skill set that maximizes things. So obviously, if you replace Kristaps Porzingis like an average shooting guard, you're going to be bad, right? You've got a shooting guard out of position. But if you found a decent big that's not overly priced, we do think that'd be the right move to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting with Porzingis because so you're mentioning. Let's get back to this page here, his player page. He's at 54.8% true shooting this year, which is not bad for him, but it is, pretty bad for a big player overall. But an even bigger problem is a lot of that comes from his free throws. I mean, that's good for them, right? That he gets to the line a lot and makes them. But I think it sort of props up how bad his two-point shooting is. And what I'm getting out of here is he could be okay on the Mavericks if he had a different role, right? If he shot a lot less two-pointers, if he just played defense, maybe took some threes every once in a while. But now that but this is the real world, right? He's got his contract now. He wants to take as many shots as possible to get paid and continue to, be desirable to teams. And he does have to build up to himself, that this is the way to play and this is really good. So he should keep playing this way. And I think, yeah, even if you wanted to change his game, it's probably a lost cause. You probably want to try to move him.
And by the way, for one reason this is really hard for a lot of people to get, we keep coming back to the subject, which is the NBA is a different game. One thing I just did for fun, Brian, hop to the 1988-1989 season on the player comparison engine. I don't think you'll be able to keep up. That tool's a little clunky. We'll need to fix it one of these days. But I looked at Larry Bird and Hakeem Olajuwon. So the bigger thing to look at is if I look at the average in the NBA. The average small forward had a 53.4% true shooting. The average center had an average true shooting of 54%. Kristaps Porzingis compared to historical players is above average, but in the modern NBA is below average. So I understand why it's really hard for people to look at him and go, how can you say Kristaps Porzingis is a below average player? He gets 20 points a game and this and this and this, and that's the funny thing. The NBA is an aggregate zero sum game.
Yep.
You have to look at everything a player does, and you have to compare it to league average. And if they're below average, that's not worth it. And that's a tough game to be in, right? We absolutely understand, but that is where we'd put, say, Kristaps Porzingis and Brook Lopez at this point.
Yeah, and this is not a diss on, Hakeem Olajuwon and Larry Bird. I bet they would both be much higher percentage shooters if they were playing now, just based on changing, philosophies and whatnot. So we're not trying to say he's as good as them, right?
Well, we always run into this issue.
It's a time machine problem.
Well, actually, it's funny. I'm going to hop subjects because it goes cohesively with this, and then we'll come back. I think I'm gonna make sure we hit all the topics. I'm just gonna take a slightly different route, but it goes for all of them. So recently, Daryl Morey came out swinging, annoyingly in a way that we agree with. Like Daryl Morey, he's annoying where we agree with some of his stuff 100%, and other stuff we're like, what the hell are you doing? But he was talking about sideline commentators and making a point that we've heard a lot and agree with, which is like, you have people commenting on the game of basketball that hate basketball, that will come in and say, back in my day, we did it better. Modern players suck, right? We hear that a lot. Former greats, Shaquille O'Neal, Charles Barkley, Scottie Pippen, all these new players, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, what the blank are you doing? And then he also made a joke where, that you'll have sideline commentators that are like, this game doesn't matter. It's the regular season. Nothing matters to the playoffs. And you go, why the F do you have people commenting on your games that are telling the viewers to go watch something else? Like, figure this out. And, we agree with that point. And so the funny thing is, when you were talking about like comparing historical to modern, that is where that gets about, is you have older players that complain about new players. And we think there is an easy out for those players, which is to say, the reason James Harden is as amazing as he is he got to watch me, right? He got to watch me play. He got to study my game. In my day, right, like Michael Jordan can say, back in my day, we had Dr. J, and I couldn't even find him on TV if I wanted to because the ABA wasn't nationally televised. James Harden got to grow up watching me, got to grow up watching Kobe, got to see our highlights, got to see our tapes. Of course he's amazing. He got to watch me. If I got to watch me play for, while I was training at 10, 15 years old, I'd be even more amazing. That's what I wish modern players would say. And I think Hakeem Olajuwon has said that. He's like, yeah, modern bigs are fantastic. So that's one thing that really bugs me about the sideline commentator thing that Daryl Morey is talking, is it's going, these sideline commentators have such an easy out to be both self-congratulatory and also respectful of the modern game. And instead they go the other way and go, modern players suck. You've got Bill Russell saying, I'd whoop this guy's ass. It's like, no, Bill Russell, you'd get your ass kicked even if you were playing in the modern. If we got 1960s Bill Russell and put him in the modern NBA, he'd get smoked. But that's because the modern NBA got to study 1960s Bill Russell.
And if I were to guess, I'd think that's how this happened, right? That Charles Barkley especially, but also Bill Walton, and Shaq, came in as these edgy all-time great players that were also commentators, right? And that was Shaq's thing. He just, clowned around and hit him off and made him a superstar broadcaster. I think there's been all these other former players that have been brought in now, and they want to copy that effect, right? They're like, Charles is gold, so we just want more players. And I think Morey is right, though. It has probably got a little too far if you're the NBA, right? It doesn't serve your purposes very well. I'll just say, as a fan, though, the other side can be frustrating, too. And by that, I mean local broadcasts with over-the-top homers that will only, talk about how good and great the franchise is and how the owner is such a magnanimous billionaire and all that. And it's just like, ugh, that makes me a little bit sick, too. So, yeah, I enjoy the more traditional professional sports broadcast where you're critical and complimentary both when it's warranted and not too far on the other side, and just be real about it and have a good broadcast and have fun, though. That's one thing I do like about Charles, is he has fun.
Well, it's funny. I'll get another subject we've got, which is James Harden versus Yanis, because we kind of called this like a weird wrestling feud. And exactly what you were just saying about sideline commentators, it relates so much to like what Jim Ross, and for those that don't know, Jim Ross is one of the most famous sideline commentators in wrestling history. Worked for both WCW, WWE, and now works for AEW. And if
Well,
you
he
listen
also
to him,
brought on most of those Attitude Era guys into the WWE, right, Dre? Like he actually helped recruit some of those top guys.
he is very much like a Jerry West of wrestling, where great sideline commentator, great personnel decider, just one of the all-time greats in wrestling history. And when you listen to him talk about being a sideline commentator, he'll say that he'll go, wrestling is staged, right? The outcome is predetermined, and sometimes there's silly stuff that happens, right? Some of the people he brought in, you mentioned one of my favorites is
Yep.
Mankind. Mankind would like use a sock to finish people off. He would put a sock on his hand and shove it down their throat, and that was supposed to finish them off in the match. And he'd go, "This is ridiculous," but as the sideline commentator, I have to sell it. And then he's also I've said stuff like you were saying, which is going, if something ridiculous is going on, you have to actually respond to it as if you understand what's going on. You can't just always go scripted, and you can't hate on the product. It's a fine balance, and it would do the NBA well to observe that. And we love professional wrestling as a template that could be used. And something we brought up a lot is many, many times in basketball, when there are feuds going on, they remind us of wrestling, where I think we get more invested than the players. And it gets very hard to know how much the players are being earnest and how much they're kind of playing a part. And one of the things that came up during the All-Star break, and I did want to comment on because it's so bizarre in so many fashions, is during the NBA All-Star game, Team Giannis, the way the All-Star game works now is that the two highest vote getters get to be team captains and pick a team. And Giannis was one of the captains, and he did not pick James Harden. He picked Kemba Walker. And when asked about that, his comment was, "I want someone who will pass." And many astute people noted James Harden has more assists per game than Kemba Walker. I think James Harden led the league in assists one year. It's like, to say James Harden isn't a passer is absolutely ridiculous. Now, James Harden came back later and was talking about Giannis and basically kind of came up with this weird, again, self-hating thing, the thing Morey is against and we are against too, because it's so full of crap, where he said, Giannis doesn't have skill. He's just 7 feet tall and can jump, and, that's easy. It doesn't take skill. And one of the frustrating things, I looked this up really quick, is Giannis is listed at Basketball Reference at 6'11". If you look for players that have shot as efficiently as Giannis at over 15 shots a game, it's like 7 players total in NBA history. And like Hakeem Olajuwon is one of them, for what it's worth. So it's like, to act like that is not skill is ridiculous to us. It's also weird to have like self-hating product, but then to tie it all back together, how much of that is wrestling? How much of that is James Harden and Giannis knowing that having a feud builds stuff in the NBA, and a Rockets versus Bucks finals could now be fantastic with that going on, and that's kind of always been the case, right? Like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson made the league in the '80s and were notorious rivals, but I think Magic, I forget what Larry Bird inducted Magic into the Hall of Fame, right? They still had respect for each other, so it's kind of one of these. How much of that is real? How much of that is fake? Funny point. What they're doing, we think, helps the sport more than like Charles Barkley hating the product. But that's in a way because you need the narrator of your product to take the product seriously, whereas you can have the actors of your product kind of have some of these pettiness.
Well, and the interesting thing about it is the way the Turner Studio show is set up. It kind of is like two faces and two heels, right? It's usually, with Shaq and Charles, the heels, you have Kenny and Ernie Johnson, who are the faces, who will usually talk up, the products, and they'll scold Shaq and Charles when they get too far off base, right? So, so to answer your question, it seems like on a lower level, maybe some of it is, kayfabe, and some of it is real. But then on a more medium to higher level, where they're organizing who's going to be on their shows, that does seem all produced to me.
Yeah. All right. Let's. I don't have a subtle way, but let's stay on the Rockets. So the Rockets have embraced small ball, and I'm very happy, Brian, because we waited a week properly, and I get to disagree with you because you said the Rockets have embraced small ball, and it seems to be working for them, right? They think they won 6 straight. And
And then they lost to the Knicks.
then they lost to the Knicks. And so here is the funny thing about what the Rockets did in their strategy. And we have talked this at length thanks to your Golden State Warriors. The Golden State Warriors were one of the first teams under Mark Jackson that was known at adopting a small ball style. Now, the first thing that we noted was that was true pre-Kevin Durant. Post-Kevin Durant, they were not a small ball team. Additionally, they picked up Andrew Bogut, and you're not really a small ball team with Andrew Bogut. But a lot of their small ball strategy revolved around two things. One, Draymond Green is a small forward that's able to play productively as a center. So the cheat code to being small ball is you still need to put up center numbers, even if you're doing it with a small forward. You cannot just replace a center with a small forward's production and expect it to work. But second, their small ball strategy would sometimes work in that it would bait the opponent, because where this first kind of took off was in the playoffs against the Nuggets. Playoffs against the Nuggets, they had David Lee. David Lee has been played as a center a lot in his career, but was, really, we would say was a really, really good power forward, a 2010 machine when healthy, that was playing for the Golden State Warriors, and he was injured in the playoffs. And so the Warriors played small ball, not out of choice, out of necessity. They were missing their starting power forward center. And so they played small, and the Nuggets, George Karl decided to match him. And so the Nuggets at that time, I think, had like JaVale McGee and who did they trade? They traded a guy to the Memphis Grizzlies. They had a couple of really good undervalued bigs, these Moneyball bigs that we liked. George Karl chose to go small, and it turns out that the small players the Nuggets had were worse than the small players the Warriors had. So despite being a better team on paper, the Nuggets got upset in the playoffs by the Warriors. And then that convinced Andre Iguodala to go over to the Warriors, and, the rest is history. But the small ball strategy works when you bait your opponent into playing small against you. And that's what's happened a lot with the Warriors, or with the Rockets with their recent small ball with trading Clint Capella for Robert Covington.
They beat the Celtics when the Celtics went small.
And yeah, they beat well, also, didn't they go to overtime against the Celtics? And then also, I didn't put this on the script at all, but just as a note, this is a funny thing. The Utah Jazz recently. So the Utah Jazz recently were going to bench Mike Conley. They were going to play him as the sixth man off the bench. So they tweeted this out. They said, Utah Jazz are going to play Mike Conley off the bench. And then shortly after came back and said, actually, we're going to play Joe Ingles off the bench. Mike Conley remains in the starting lineup. Funny thing, Brian, this is hilarious to us, because for years, the Boxscore Geek has said, oh my goodness, Mike Conley and Marc Gasol are old and beat up, and the under on Memphis is gold. We said that for years. And somehow Mike Conley and Marc Gasol would miss 20 games to injury, but come back healthy. The Memphis Grizzlies would hit the over, and we'd say, God damn it. And so finally, right, they traded this offseason for Mike Conley. They traded Ricky Rubio for Mike Conley, and we said, you know what? Not a horrible move, because Mike Conley is perceived as more of a star player than Ricky Rubio. This is probably going to help them more for retaining players and attracting future players. And on paper, I think preseason, Brian, I get to be wrong, because preseason you said you were worried about Mike Conley. I said, look at his numbers last year. He did fine last year, very much like Al Horford, where we went, last season he was fine. This is going to be fine. Everything's fine. And Mike Conley has been atrocious. So when you look at that game where the Rockets beat the Jazz, two things happened. First off, the rest of the Jazz somehow forgot how to shoot threes. Like, as much as we enjoyed bashing Donovan Mitchell's actually been a decent player this season and shoots above average from three. He forgot how to shoot threes. Joe Ingles forgot how to shoot threes. Bogdanovich, which one of them, right? It's Bojan or Bogdan, one of the two.
Bojan on the Jazz.
Bojan.
Yeah. Bogdan is on the Kings.
Yeah, it's that they are such a confusing regular.
It took me years to realize they were two different people. For a while, I thought they were the same player.
They're both really good at 3-point shooting too, but Bogdanovich forgot how to shoot threes. So, in that game against the Rockets that they lost, basically it's because they played Mike Conley, who is terrible, and they forgot how to shoot threes. It wasn't as if the Rockets outplayed them on a strategy. It was like the Jazz shot 20% from three, and if the Jazz, who are one of the better 3-point shooting teams in the league, forget how to shoot threes for a game, you're going to win. The Celtics are missing Kemba Walker, right? He was injured after the All-Star game, and they won in overtime. So it's like, on the one hand, people are going, "Oh, the strategy is working." I'm going, "They played some bad teams and gotten some luck, and they've also baited some teams into playing small." But against the Knicks, because as people know, the Knicks like have signed every power forward in the league. That's been their MO for the last 3 seasons. The Knicks had no choice but to play big, and the Knicks played big and managed to beat the Rockets. And it was a close win. So on the one hand, you be like, it wasn't that close. It wasn't, that big of an upset. But you go, the Knicks, I believe, have yet to win 20 games, whereas the Rockets are a top 4 seed. That is not good. So I think way too many people are being results oriented. We've seen this plenty of times where a team is bad and they change something up and they start doing good. And if you put regression to the mean plus their strength of schedule, this is not out of the ordinary. It doesn't really matter what they did, they were going to get better. That's kind of my call on the Rockets. The Rockets had a favorable set of matchups, including like luck, right, with facing the Celtics without one of their starters. So I don't necessarily think this is working just yet. This small ball strategy that the Rockets have embraced, and I'm really happy that they lost the Knicks, and we get to comment on that because obviously right after it happened, we said they lost Capella, they signed Covington. Oh, good God, this is hilarious. And then of course they won some games, and like I said, my analysis of their wins are weak competition, luck against the Celtics and the Jazz, and then they lost to the freaking Knicks, Brian.
Yeah, and well, so what I base this on is the thought that Robert Covington, who's played small forward and power forward in his career mostly, just putting him in at center, that was just going to be a huge disaster, and they just get crushed, in rim and unable to protect their own rim or rebound. That's the formula for small ball getting destroyed. Well, he's actually played, kind of as big as Capella, which is surprising, right? He's been protecting the rim like crazy. Not quite the defensive rebounder that Capella is, but maybe that's not as important as offensive rebounding. Here's the thing, though, like you said, that could be a house of cards. It worked against Utah in one game, but will it in a 7-game series? And a bigger problem for them, I think, is going to be the Lakers. All those, Anthony Davises of the world will just run roughshod over Covington, it seems like to me, but, they've been proving it wrong so far. So, yeah, I'm just watching Covington and Tucker. And another thing to consider about those two guys, they are a little smaller. Will their bodies hold up getting banged by the huge 7-footers in the playoffs? So here's my thing about small ball overall. You're just limiting the tools in your toolbox, right? You have a hammer for every single problem, whereas you may want, a few different types of tools against different teams. Going small ball is great against other small teams, I think. They destroyed the Warriors by like 30 points the other night. It's like, yeah, the Warriors are even smaller than the Rockets and the players are less talented, so that's going to work every time. But when there's different avenues to win, you might need to do it a different way at certain points in certain games. So that's what I'm concerned about. They've limited themselves too much. But for the sake of science, it's a really fun experiment. I'm going to enjoy watching them in the playoffs.
But yeah, my bigger point is they have one legitimate win, in my opinion, in this 6-1 in this post All-Star break stretch.
And looking at the game log, they're putting up 125, 130 points a game and giving up well over 100 themselves. So a little bit tenuous.
But again, just I want to stress, they played the Warriors once, who are terrible, the Knicks twice, who are terrible, Boston Celtics without Kemba Walker and had to win in overtime, and then the Memphis Grizzlies, right? So
not
it's
teams that can punish them.
I give them one team that I'm worried about, and for what it's worth, the Jazz, the Mike Conley point, what I'm enjoying as a Denver Nuggets fan is that it really, really looked like either the Portland Trail Blazers or the Utah Jazz were in a great, great spot to overtake the Nuggets in the Northwest Division. And it hasn't happened, and part of it was, right, the Utah Jazz, right, they traded away Derek Favors. They traded Ricky Rubio for Mike Conley. It's like the Jazz it's hilarious to me, Brian, because I was kind of bashing them for playing Donovan Mitchell, although the reality, as I've mentioned, coming back, like I said this pre-show when we were talking being marks. So essentially, I'm going to have to admit on air, so I've done this plenty of times, but let's just make sure there's another one out there. I have been too hard on Donovan Mitchell, and it's because as a wrestling fan, I got drawn into the Donovan Mitchell versus Ben Simmons feud. and I was team Ben Simmons, and that's fine. The comparable I made to that, Brian, is Ben Simmons is the Giannis Antetokounmpo. So Ben Simmons as a rookie was just the rookie of the year. Just it wasn't a question. He was rookie of the year. Stamp it, sign, seal, delivered. Decide who's number two. That's the case for Giannis Antetokounmpo this season as MVP. And actually, what I would say at this point, Brian, is, don't want to jinx anything. Giannis decides he's going to take the rest of the season off. So not even injury. Let's just say Giannis says, you know what? We are so easily going to win the East, right? We're 10 games up, right, with 20 games to go. I know my team can go 500 throughout the remaining 20 games. I'm going to sit out so I'm healthy for the playoffs. I was injured last year's playoffs. That would be terrible. This would be a great promo, right? If this is like a wrestling promotion, Brian, it'd be fun stuff. For those that don't know,
Sunday, there's going to be some load management.
Oh, we're going to have you cut some promos, Brian. This is awesome. So there was a big storyline in WCW, a famous character named Sting. He just kept hovering over the ring for like a year. And the reason was he was injured. And so he couldn't wrestle, but they wanted people to remember him. And it was just this big buildup, and it was awesome. They mucked it up eventually, but it was a so you could have that. And right, to a degree, Steph Curry is doing that this season. Like, when's Steph Curry going to come back? Right, March 1st? No, didn't happen.
Right now, it looks like Thursday, but we'll see.
He should stay. But anyway, we'll leave that off until he's back. But yeah, Giannis could take the rest of the season off, and I'd still give him MVP, right? I'd still stamp it at this point. So just that is how good it is. And I was kind of saying that to Donovan Mitchell, where I got drawn into that feud kind of needlessly because Ben Simmons was so obviously the MVP, but basically that team's insistence.
Oh, rookie of the year, right? Not MVP.
Rookie of the year. Actually, I would like him as MVP.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Some year, yeah. But I guess I'll just say the Utah Jazz playing Mike Conley, they're just shooting themselves on the foot needlessly, and it's kind of hilarious to watch.
Yeah, and I don't remember being as high or as down on Mike Conley in the preseason. I guess I'm glad I was, but here's the tough thing to say. He's an older player that's been hurt this year, and at this point, we just don't know, right? He could just be done. He may never be that good player again. Or, he could be another Chris Paul and just come back and have another good season. Although that's a bad example. He was never as good as Chris Paul, right? But I'm just saying it does happen with older players that were good every once in a while. So if you're the Jazz, you can't depend on him, though. And they just have not spent enough on their backcourt versus all these forwards and Gobert, unfortunately.
All right. Let's see. No real subtle way to get to this last topic, Brian, but I wanted to get to it, which is Spike Lee. So, good God, the Knicks are a mess. For those that don't know, apparently Charles Oakley, one of the former greats, got in trouble and has had a lawsuit against the Knicks. I think it was thrown out of court, unfortunately. But regardless, if you have a former great player on the Knicks and you're getting them kicked out by security, what's going on? Spike Lee, who is kind of synonymous with the Knicks, for those that don't know, he's a famous director that has always been a courtside fan of the Knicks.
28 years.
28 years?
Yep.
And then what I was going to say is I think I didn't watch the full segment, but on Stephen A. Smith, I don't know if his first take, but he was talking to Stephen A. Smith and basically admitted that over the last 30 years, he's probably spent $10 million on the Knicks because he spent about $300,000 a year on courtside seats for the Knicks, and recently got into a kerfuffle because he was upset that they weren't letting him in through like a VIP entrance. And
well, let's be specific on that. So here's my understanding. Here's the entrances to Madison Square Garden. There's the general entrances that everyone uses. There's the VIP entrances that are for celebrities. And then there is the staff entrance. And apparently Spike Lee, because he's been around so long, had this handshake deal that he's been using the staff entrance for a long time instead of the VIP entrance. And his side of the story is they cut him off, but on the floor with the security people without giving him any advance notice. And he felt they were messing with him because of that.
And yeah, I mean, and James Dolan is just the worst owner in the NBA with Donald Sterling getting ousted. James Dolan, same thing, right? Like, Giannis is the MVP, no question. Ben Simmons was Rookie of the Year, no question. Rookie of the Year this season. Let me throw that out to you, Brian. What are your thoughts on Morant versus Zion Williamson take?
I don't know if Zion has enough games. Well, so first of all, it's Brandon Clark in my world, but I don't know if he's hurt too though, so it's tough. But if you're just going to say who's had the best body of work for rookies so far up until this point in the season, easily Brandon Clark, easily.
All right. I love it, Brian. So, and actually, I like you made a very defined litmus test, which is best body of work so far. And then the question I would give to you is there enough time, right? There are about 20 games left in the NBA season. Is there enough time for Zion to put on a show to overtake Brandon Clark? Let's say, hypothetically, worst case scenario, Brandon Clark stays injured. Zion Williamson plays out the remainder of those 20 games. Great. Do you think Zion can overtake him?
I think so. Clark played 50 games. So I would say, in terms of who I think is the rightful winner, I would say no. But I would say, in terms of the real world, does he have a chance to win it still? Yeah, I think he absolutely does. Because in the real world, most people aren't on Brandon Clark like I am.
Okay. No, that's a very I like that take, Brian. That's very good. Okay, so anyway,
shout out to Michael Porter Jr. also, by the way. He's a great rookie on your Nuggets.
Annoying problem, which is, even if he was going to steal the argument, right, the like amazing individual games, he loses to Zion, at least by conventional wisdom. So it's like, yeah, even if he was going to sneak in that side door of, yeah, I haven't played the whole season, and yeah, I haven't been playing starters minutes, and I've been injured, you go, well, Zion, like, fair enough. All right, so that being said, right, Donald Sterling is the de facto worst owner, not a question. I think it's years running, right, at this point. It's not.
Well, you're saying James Dolan since Donald Sterling got kicked out of the league.
Yes, that's true. He's got to have had the crown for as many years as Sterling's been out of the league. He probably took it some of the years Sterling was in the league too. I'm just saying, because
pure management, right?
just such a mess of a front office, and like we said, we have a lot of sympathy. I've said this to Art a lot of times. We were talking, early on the show, who's done this great work. I said, as a statistician, I am happy that he did the work he did with the Knicks, right? Because the weird situation, all the stuff he was privy to, means that we get a really nice data set that lets me get really concrete t-tests for my statistical case study. As a statistician, that's great. He chose, I don't want to say chose, because when you're trying to get your foot in the door with an NBA franchise, you can kind of take the opportunities that present yourself. In terms of luck for a franchise to getting the Dolan era, because Art started working for them right after Dolan got the team, getting the Dolan era Knicks is got to be the worst, like, pick of the draw for trying to get your foot in the door with an NBA team. So they have just been a horrible team. And I just don't even understand this entire situation, right? How can you really bash your best players? How can you bash your super fans, right? We talk wrestling, another weird industry to compare to is like the casino industry. And casino industries understand, like, if you find people, they're called like whales or fish, right? These are people that spend a lot of money. You find ways to keep them happy, right? So casinos, what they'll do is, if you have someone who comes in and loses $100,000 gambling, you don't treat them like crap. Instead, you comp them rooms, you give them free upgrades at the buffet, you do everything in your power. So, and people can hate this, right? I understand that, to even view it as being kind of like skeevy, but as we just mentioned, Spike Lee has spent like $10 million in tickets alone, right? That's not on anything else, right? We don't know if he's ever bought a suite for like parties at Madison Square Gardens, how much money he spent on food, merchandise, whatever, how much just attention he brings, right, to the Madison Square Gardens arena. Who knows on all of that? So it's like, are you really going to say, like, giving him an entrance, like letting him in through the employee entrance is like that far over the line? And whenever I see people get upset with that, they're like, can you believe that Delta, gives this multi-medallion person like free upgrades here? It's like, yeah, that's how things work in the real world. I hate to burst your bubble, but like, people that spend a lot of money get preferential treatment in lots of businesses because they want to keep those people happy because they want their money. And that's how the world works. And so watching what the Knicks are doing, you're like, what? It's like, you're a luxury good that doesn't understand how to be a luxury good.
Yeah, and while you were talking about that, I brushed up on Dolan's background a little bit because I was suspicious of, that what I was saying was right. And yeah, of course it is. Dolan was the CEO of Cablevision, but of course, like, his father founded it and appointed him to be that CEO, right? So I'm not necessarily saying he's incompetent at business, but I'm saying he's like, he has this silver spoon in his mouth, right, in terms of business and real life. So he has the luxury of being shitty to his biggest customers just because he's always been on top. So who cares, right? Like he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to those whales. He can just say goodbye, whales. And not very good business, but I think that's his mentality.
And what's really, really annoying about the NBA is, as a business, we've kind of said this point before. If you want to run a business and make money, right? If you've got $1 billion and want to make money, running an NBA team is not a good idea, because a lot of the day-to-day stuff, right? The NBA has like weird salary cap rules, so like you couldn't do something really clever where you had a $10 million salary. The NBA has a salary floor, so you have to spend a certain amount of money. And the NBA has profit sharing, and the NBA has all this other stuff that makes it hard to necessarily maximize that amount of money if you were looking at day-to-day operations of something. The way to make money on an NBA team is to view it as an asset that you are holding that you can flip, right? Because if you look at the values of NBA franchises from 1980 on, they've just gone up and up and up and up and up. And then New York Knicks are the most lucrative franchise. And there are billionaires. I mean, like, maybe it would probably be better for Mike Bloomberg to, instead of wasting so much money running for president, to just like buy the Knicks. Like that would be a much better use of his money, and he could afford them, right? He's that rich. That's really the key. So with Dolan, to your point, that's another problem, is he was able to get the Knicks because he was, as you noted, just inherited all that money. So he didn't have to work for it. And now with the Knicks, the value of that team is not its day-to-day operations. It's that if one day he wants to make $10 billion, at least, I bet, right? He turns around and sells the Knicks. So he has no incentive to do good. And actually, this has always been a frustrating part about being a sports fan, is that, like, it is not an owner's incentive to treat fans well. And as long as they're able to use public money, because that's what a lot of teams do, right? They threaten to leave until the public funding gives them tax breaks or pays for a new stadium. As long as that is there, owners will just not have to treat fans well, and that really sucks. And I just say, let Spike Lee be a lesson. You can spend hundreds of $1,000s on tickets, be a huge name, right? Like Spike Lee recently won an Academy Award for the Klansman, right? The
Black Klansman.
For the Black Klansman, he won a.
Have you seen that, by the way? That's supposed to be really good. I should see that.
I haven't seen that yet. I mean, it's shout out. I mean, Spike Lee is a visionary.
Do the Right Thing is one of the best American films ever made. It's so perfect in so many ways.
Years in front of the Rodney King scandal. And I think that was the funny thing about how that movie was received, is I think I've heard when that movie came out, a lot of people watched it and were like, I don't understand. This would never happen. And then like 5 years later, the world's like, just kidding. So, I mean, he's a visionary, Academy Award winner, has spent millions of dollars on tickets, and a billionaire who just has a bone to pick can still treat him like crap in our system, in our sports system. And that's a good lesson for fans to have. The owners are not on your side. The owners are not your friends. Like, when the next lockout happens, don't think that the billionaires that are holding the door to the league shut are your friends, and they're the people whose side you want to be on.
There you go. I still said last lockout that the players should start their own league, and maybe next time they can do that.
Yeah, it won't happen. I mean, it's really, really rough. I mean, the easy problem owners, the easy leverage owners have is that because your lifespan as a player is so short, and the NBA is so good, that for any player, it's a stupid like game theory problem. It makes more sense to lose a little money every year for the next 5 years and get back to playing to maximize your career earnings, as opposed to starting your leagues and trying to ramp it up. I mean, like even the XFL is an example, which is a competitive league trying to fight against the NFL. The only reason the XFL exists is because it is run by a billionaire with, very much like Mike Bloomberg, money to waste. The XFL may very well succeed. What it kind of reminds me of is the Xbox. So Microsoft decided they wanted to get into the video game market in the 2000s, and they released the Xbox. And it initially, compared to the Sony PlayStation and I believe the GameCube, was like third place for a really long time. But if you're a multi-billion-dollar company that's willing to just take hit after hit after hit until you eventually have a market share, you can get there. And that's what the XFL is trying to do, and it may very well work. And it's not a bad strategy because the NFL is essentially a monopoly. And in fact, there was a rival league to the NFL back in the day called the USFL that was actually looking pretty good. And then this crazy billionaire decided to sue the NFL and move the XFL head to head against them. And it bankrupted the USFL. And for those that don't know, that man was Donald Trump. And then we decided to put him in front of a country. It is what it is, Brian. All right. Hit all our subjects, so I'll let you get the cappers. Sorry to end this on a depressing note.
We almost got through without Trump, but yeah, that's okay. No, I think we covered pretty much everything. I'm gonna watch this. Speaking of the Nuggets, I'm gonna watch them destroy the Warriors on DVR right after this. So yeah, have fun watching basketball tonight.
I can't spoil, but I'll look in. They were, I do know this, they were a 16-point dog to start the night, the Warriors against the Nuggets. So the Warriors are not expected to win. Brian, if the Warriors win or lose by 10 or less, it is actually a monumentous victory. As an example, if the Warriors lose by 6 points tonight, that is equivalent to them. That is basically as big of an edge as how good they were in their prime. So view it that way, Brian. They lose by 6 or less, it's a monumentous win.
Maybe Jokic can give them a little bit of a advantage. Maybe he can start drinking a few beers even during the game, before post-game celebrations. I don't know. We need something.
All right. I actually do have a really good shout out, a fun one. The unpopular opinion, one of the few things I actually shell out money for. So check unpopular opinion out at Patreon. They also do have a series of podcasts you can get for free, including the Unpopular Opinion podcast. But they have done some great sports content, and they did actually release one today on NBA conspiracies where they talked about the Tim Donaghy betting scandal and then kind of how the NBA deals with that, which is one of my favorite subjects ever. So the Unpopular Opinion podcast, this particular one was called Conspiracy Theory, the show, and it was on the NBA betting scandals. And then they've also done a You Don't Like Sports podcast, what they call You Don't Even Like Sports. The premise is they want a sports podcast for people that aren't necessarily sports fan, and their current topic is Dennis Rodman. So good God, great sports content. If you're looking for it, Unpopular Opinion, check it out.
That's all I got. No more shout-outs.
Ryan's just like, good shout-outs.
Yep.
And then also in that same vein, a fun book recommendation is called Gaming the Game, which is about the NBA betting scandal. If you haven't read that, it's a fun one, good read, a little early for like a stocking stuffer, but if you've got, I'm pretty sure it's at your local library or, so I had an audio, I used one of my Audible credits on it, and it's a good one. So check that out. That's all I got, Brian. That's been this week's show. We are at the Boxscore Geeks. We are at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. We have changed that to Tuesdays, usually around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch recaps of the show on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. We, of course, also have the podcast version you can find on iTunes and Stitcher, The Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, vote us up. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, found most places as Boxscore Brian. Hope your team beats the Rockets in this upcoming week, and if they don't, it's because Smallball wins.